In the Everglades, one is most aware of the superb monotony of sawgrass under the world of air. But below that and before it is the water. I have always thought that water was the key to their very existence.
She was born a decade before the beginning of the 20th century, and over the many years that followed, she would live life the way most others could only dream. Strong, purposeful, and with a confidence that endured throughout her lifetime. Marjory Stoneman Douglas, writer, activist, environmentalist. A small woman who became a giant in the crusade to save one of America's most precious natural resources. Her book, The Everglades, River of Grass, made her famous around the world. This body of work would prove to be her crowning moment as a writer, but would mark only the beginning of her life as an environmental icon. Life began for Marjory Stoneman Douglas on April 7, 1890, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The first and only child of Frank Bryant Stoneman and the former Miss Florence Lillian Trefethen. Frank Stoneman was 6 feet 2, broad-shouldered with hazel eyes and a Roman nose that hovered over a great mustache. Lillian, as Mrs. Stoneman chose to be called, was a small woman whose striking beauty would leave her daughter feeling less and less attractive throughout her life. In 1894, Mr. and Mrs. Stoneman began a lengthy trip from Minnesota down the Mississippi River across the Gulf of Mexico to Tampa, Florida. With them was 4-year-old Marjory.
My first memory of Florida was being held up to pick an orange off an orange tree in the gardens of the Tampa Bay Hotel.
From Tampa, they booked passage to Havana.
I could hear my father and mother talking on deck outside the open door. The room was filled with marvelous light, this wonderful white tropic light. I saw it and was thrilled by it. I never forgot the quality of the tropic light.
Many years later, she would recognize that same light as something she had loved and missed. After the trip, her father's business would falter, leaving him little choice but to move his family east to Massachusetts, near his wife's hometown. But more business failure led to eventual strain on the marriage and a nervous breakdown for Lillian Stoneman. The marriage ended. Mother and daughter moved in with maternal grandmother Florence Trefethen, and Marjory's father moved away. Here in the picturesque town of Taunton, Massachusetts, Marjory would grow up.
I suppose the dislocation of my life, being the child of a broken family, made me something of a skeptic and a dissenter for the rest of my life.
Over the years, she was able to escape her childhood sorrow by getting lost in a world of books. In the town's Carnegie Library, or at home, books became her refuge. This fascination with words became her security in a world that escalated in pain. Marjory worshipped her mother, but the nervous breakdowns that continued for Mrs. Stoneman became bitter reminders to Marjory of how much love could hurt. School was enjoyable, another form of escape, and she excelled. Her favorite high school teacher was Miss Hammer, a constant source of inspiration. It was here that Marjory's love of words turned a creative corner. She began to write the Class Ode of 1908.
But the trail calls us on. Let us turn and be gone, for heights are yet to be passed. With courage to strive and with purpose alive, let us climb bravely on to the last.
She was 18 years old and ready for the world.
Aboard!
In the fall of that same year, she left for Wellesley College. Though encouraged by her mother, Marjory felt that when the train pulled out from Taunton Station, Lillian Stoneman began to die.
Marjory Stoneman Douglas's mother was probably the most prominent figure in her life. She had psychotic breaks. Marjory saw these psychotic breaks. The grandmother, of course, knew about them, and the grandmother knew that if Marjory didn't go away to college, she would never escape the effects of having to see this.
But in the spring of her junior year, her mother was diagnosed with cancer of the breast, and for a short time, Marjory came home. There, in the hospital, the night before the operation, mother and daughter slept in the same bed. Throughout the night, she would hold her mother in her arms, but seeing her in pain was again too hard to take.
She has massive regrets at having left her mother when her mother was dying of cancer. She went back to college. And Marjory chose that summer to become a swimming instructor in a girls' camp in Maine.
Just weeks after Marjory's graduation, Lillian Stoneman died. It had been years since anyone had direct contact with her father, but Frank Stoneman was found and notified in Florida.
When the moon is shining yellow and
For the next year, Marjory drifted from teaching school in St. Louis to working as educational director at Bamberger's department store in Newark, New Jersey. She was in a state of mind that couldn't have been lower. It was here that she met and married a man 30 years her senior named Kenneth Douglas.
There would be no motivation, subconsciously or otherwise, for her to make such a marriage unless he were a very strong father figure. Of course, she quickly realized he was not a father figure because he didn't have any answers. He had none of the answers.
His many bad debts led to a prison term. Marjory ended the marriage.
Marjory never again was vulnerable. She's like Scarlett. She said, "I'll never be hungry again." And Marjory said, "I will never be under the dominion of anyone again." Yet she was. Because when she came to Miami, she was under the dominion of her father.
It was 1915, and she was 25 years old. With no place else to turn, she was on her way to Florida, to a divorce and to her father. For Marjory Stoneman Douglas, a new life was about to begin.
It was a long trip from New York to Florida in those days, something like 2 nights and a day or 2 days and a night. I managed to collect enough money to buy a new dress, blue serge with blue taffeta and trimming. I kept looking out and seeing pine trees go by. Pine trees for hour after hour, an infinity of pine trees.
The train arrived in Miami at 7 a.m. Her father was not scheduled to meet her until 9 o'clock. She left the train and began walking.
There was no particular vegetation, nothing interesting to speak of, and then suddenly, this marvelous bay. It was cool, blue and green, with the wind coming off the sea and the slanting early morning sunlight. It was a wonderful setting at the edge of what was then a second-rate town.
She went back to the train, and her father arrived.
He came towards me, and suddenly he stopped. The way I'd developed, the way my face had developed, was a great shock to my father. He expected a pretty girl, but I wasn't. He couldn't help it. My mother was beautiful.
Frank Stoneman had remarried. After 10 years as a struggling attorney, he took an old flatbed press as a bad debt and started Miami's first morning paper, the News Record. Through the power of his paper, he wanted to stop Florida Governor Napoleon Bonaparte Broward from draining the Everglades. Stoneman had very strong opinions about draining the Everglades even then, though there wasn't much scientific information to support those opinions. Later, Marjory would say her earliest notions about the Everglades came directly from her father. He eventually reorganized his newspaper into the Miami Herald. Marjory went to work for her father.
It was as if everything else I had been doing since college had all been wrong, and suddenly I found what I was meant to do. Even if it was as simple as writing society blurbs in a small city newspaper. I didn't care what I was writing about as long as I was writing.
Her social time was divided between the dance floor and the beach. A gregarious, outgoing person, she adapted well to her new surroundings.
She was somebody who was bright and eager and wanted to find out things and do something and be very original.
In the business circles of Miami, everyone talked about the big war brewing in Europe. Caught up in the excitement, Marjory joined the American Red Cross. And in 1918, set sail for France. She would be gone for a year and a half. On her return, she found an ever-expanding Miami and a new job as assistant editor of the Miami Herald.
There's no question I got both my jobs on the Herald by nepotism, but I did not keep them through nepotism. I had to perform.
It was in her column that she began to talk about Florida as a landscape and as a geography. But the work became arduous, her schedule intense.
Marjory herself had a few psychotic episodes, and if you trace back the events of her life, you'll see they're closely tied to the father. They're tied to the father not wanting to hear about the mother, preventing her from talking about her mother.
Through the advice of her doctor, with all of the pressures bearing down, she finally left the daily grind of the Miami Herald. She was 36.
When I first visited the Everglades, the two-lane road called the Tamiami Trail was being cut right through the heart of it and was finished out as far as the Dade County line. A group of us would get up before daybreak and drive to the end, build a fire in the middle of the road, cook our breakfast, and watch the sun rise. And there was the Everglades beyond us, completely untouched. The grass and the islands of the hardwood stood alone in the light and the beautiful air.
Ironically, without the road, many people would never have seen the Everglades. They were remote, nearly impossible to gain access to. This road that began to intersect it, to environmentally harm it, allowed Marjory to see its splendor firsthand. She was again reminded of her father's belief that the Everglades were truly unique. On her own now, as an independent writer, she took advantage of the situation. She was prolific. For the next 15 years, she wrote articles and stories for major magazines like the Saturday Evening Post. She had a regular byline in the New York Times for a grand fee of $25. Frank Stoneman died in February of 1941.
There was a war coming on. He couldn't take it. He was 84 years old and very tired. He'd been working on the Herald nearly to the end.
She didn't write River of Grass until her father was buried. He was dead. He was gone. She needed him to be gone, to flower, to truly be her own person.
A great release of energy seemed to launch me into my most ambitious and important project. The Everglades book, no doubt my best writing, was a product of this personal renewal.
She was 50 years old.
Herbie Allen was asked to take over the River of America's series of books for our Reinhardt. And so he went to Marjorie and said, Marjorie, I want you to write a book on the Miami River. And oh, she was thrilled. She had never written a book. So we were all thrilled. But when she researched it, she found it wasn't that much of a river. So she had to go back to Hervey and say, Hervey, it isn't that much of a river. But this is where the genius came in. She said during her research, she felt that the Everglades were really a river.
I thought, if it's running water and it comes curving down from Lake Okeechobee toward the 10,000 Islands, and if there are ridges on either side, maybe the ridges are an east bank and a west bank, and maybe the 10,000 Islands are a delta, and maybe this really is a river.
And so Everglades River of Grass was born.
River of Grass. Those three words used to describe this unique part of America educated the world to what the Everglades really were.
The water comes from the rains. The northern lakes and streams, Okeechobee itself, are only channels and reservoirs and conduits for a surface flow of rainwater, fresh from the clouds. Here the rain is everything.
Here, the rain is everything. Water from the Everglades is the drinking water for millions of people living along the coastline and provides the normal sequence of rainfall. It recycles itself through evaporation. The moisture goes up into the clouds are blown to the north, and the rains come down again. When water is kept from flowing through the glades, evaporation is reduced. The rains begin to slow, the water table begins to fall, and the Everglades begin to die. Marjory laid out the history of the slow decline of the Everglades in River of Grass. And she adopted her father's favorite enemy as her own, Napoleon Bonaparte Broward.
Broward took the stump for the governorship. He did not base his campaign entirely on drainage of the Everglades, but it became, especially in the southern counties, the most dramatic factor.
The idea was to create more land by draining off the water. No one bothered to consider the effects. Broward was elected and quickly created a board of drainage commissioners.
In 1909, the rocky ledges where the rapids of the Miami River held back the salt sea's tides from the freshwater glades were dynamited. The dark, muck-stained water worked its way over the clear sands, staining the bay bottom.
Dredges dug their way inland, creating canals for water flow. The Everglades fought back. One dredge became stuck for days, and then sank below the muck.
The Everglades was thought of as a commodity. It was a thing, and it was a rather foreboding thing, and the purpose of man was to change the Everglades into something that was more pedestrian, something more familiar, something that was more usable.
Farmers who tried to tame the land saw amazing first growth. Cabbages grew over 4 to 5 feet high. It was what the land agents had promised. But just as suddenly, the crops began to wilt. It occurred only to a few that in the Everglades muck, not all the minerals needed for agriculture were present. Later, chemicals would be introduced to the Everglades for the first time. With all this going on, the construction of the Tamiami Trail Highway continued near the lower section of the Glades. When the work was complete, 100 miles of roadway plugged the water flow through the lower Glades. Canals and dikes rerouted the water. The Everglades were dying.
River of Grass was written in 1947. When I first read it several years later, I said, oh my God, I have lived on the edge of the Everglades for all of my life, and now I'm just learning what a treasure, what a unique resource this is that has been my neighbor.
She would go on to write other books, but none to match the level of her Everglades work.
The Everglades were always a topic, but now they promised to become more than that. They promised to become a reason for things, a central force in my existence at the beginning of my 80th year.
In 1970, with the help of other concerned citizens, she started an environmental watchdog organization called Friends of the Everglades. And there was no question, Marjory Stoneman Douglas was the head dog.
She did all the talking. She told people in Friends of the Everglades what they were to do to help her, but basically she ran the show.
She started making speeches to every organization that would listen.
Speaking throughout Florida, garden clubs, Kiwanis, Rotary, you name it, she was available. She was a magnificent public speaker, indomitable, small, wonderfully dressed, marvelous hat, warm sense of humor, and then she would come to the point. And like thrusting a dagger, she knew which the enemies were and how to get beneath their armor. And she left you spellbound. She left you committed.
Her next target was the Florida legislature.
It was a combination of irritation. What is this lady with those funny-looking hats and that somewhat peculiar accent coming here preaching at us about? There was also the attitude of stunned. Most people had never been around a personality quite like Marjory before.
All this interrelated stupidity was crowned by the straightening of the Kissimmee River with a giant canal. The river no longer meandered and its beds were dried up. With less water in the river, there was less water for the lake, less water flow into the Everglades. Wasteful and stupid beyond words.
She spoke out. With the help of Johnny Jones, director of the Florida Wildlife Federation, and Art Marshall, a highly skilled ecologist, they fought to restore the river to its natural state. Governor Graham began working on the problem and through a state resolution was successful in beginning the process to restore much of the river.
In 1985, I went to visit the Kissimmee River at the governor's invitation. He said to me, "We'll come back next year and see this place all covered with water." A year later, we did return.
As soon as they diverted the water out of the canal into the old river boundaries, the river came back to life, the wetlands came back to life. So I think that's one of Marjory's crowning achievements.
And it was all for the Everglades. In 1990, at age 100, she stepped down as president of Friends of the Everglades. But she went on with an active schedule, always ready to speak out about the land she had studied for so long. Because of Marjory, the battle cry for saving the Everglades reached national attention. Millions of federal dollars will be invested in various restoration projects. There have been successes, but no one is sure what the final outcome will be.
Well, it's up to us. It's up to us to come up with a plan that really will restore and enhance as much of the Everglades system as we possibly can. If we succeed, it'll be Marjory's greatest victory.
No one has come forward to parallel what she's done. So it makes me feel that maybe she is the only person who was able to focus attention on this issue.
Her book in 1947 was a single clarion call for the protection of this wonderful resource.
Who writes like this anymore? The miracle of the light pours over the green and brown expanse of sawgrass and of water, shining and slow-moving below, the grass and the water that is the meaning and the central fact of the Everglades of Florida. It is a river of grass. I mean, that is magnificent.